How a beneficiary claim the savings of a deceased family member. Ooh, so what this refers to is inheritance, and in other terms, probate, which means just because a person passed away doesn't mean that the heirs can directly reach into the late, the deceased person's accounts or assets and appropriate them. So there's a specific process that must be followed. In short, you need to have a court order that establishes you as the beneficiary with the right to that specific, let's say, savings or to that whatever asset. So without a court order, you cannot do anything. This is because, in particular, let's say when you're dealing with savings, you're talking about banks. The banks will not respond to anything other than, in terms of inheritance in the UAE, other than a court order. Now, a court order can come in two different ways. One way is that if the deceased had left a will, so it will be enforcement of a will. So then you would have to, and that's much faster, and I've done a number of podcasts on the topic of wills and inheritance, so please definitely listen to them, because it's a fairly complex area of law, and there's a lot of different nuances. And the podcast, again, is Logical with Ludmila, L-A-W, Logical with Ludmila. But in short, if you have a will in the UAE, then it's much faster to enforce it here, and then it converts, depending on where the will is registered, it almost converts immediately to like an enforceable instrument. And then on the back of which, then you can go to the bank and the different other third parties to enforce the transfer of the deceased assets into your name. But that obviously that decision, the court decision, has to state that. So that's one way of doing it, through the will. The other way, if there was no will, is basically to go through the actual probate process. And there it depends of what nationality, what religion you were. If you were Muslim and the deceased was Muslim, then they'll be subject to Sharia law. If the deceased was non-Muslim and the foreigner from some other country, then it depends on what the beneficiaries would argue. They could argue UAE law, they could argue their home country's law, and the deceased could have had multiple nationalities. So it becomes quite complex. But one way or the other, it's the only way for you to legally be able to act on any of the late person's assets is with a court order.